Hi, I'm Peggy from room 206 and I'm reading chapter 3, Mr. Wonka and the Indian Prince. Prince Pondicherry wrote a letter to Mr. Willy Wonka, said Grandpa Joe, and asked him to come over all the way out to India and build him a colossal palace entirely out of chocolate. Did Mr. Wonka do it, Grandpa? He did indeed, and what a palace it was. It had 100 rooms and everything was made of either dark or light chocolate. Bricks were chocolate and the cement holding them together was chocolate, and the windows were chocolate, and the walls and the ceiling were all made of chocolate. So were the carpets and the pictures and the furniture, the beds, and when you turned on and tapped on the bathroom, hot chocolate came pouring out. When it was all finished, Mr. Wonka said to Prince Pondicherry, "I warn you, though, it won't last very long. You better start eating it right away." "Nonsense," shouted the prince. I'm not going to eat my palace. I'm not even going to nibble on the staircase or lick the walls. I'm going to live in it. But Mr. Wonka was right, of course, because soon after this, there came a very hot day with the boiling sun, and the whole palace began to melt. And then it sank slowly to the ground, and the crazy prince, who was dozing in the living room at the time, woke up to find himself swimming around in a huge, brown, sticky lake of chocolate. Little Charlie sat very still on the edge of the bed, staring at his grandfather. Charlie's face was bright and his eyes were stretched so wide that he could see whites all around. "Was all this really true?" he asked, "or are you just pulling my leg?" "It's true," cried all four of the old people at once. "Of course it's true. Ask anyone you like, and I'll tell you the same thing else that's true," said Grandpa Joe, and now he leaned closer to Charlie and lowered his voice to a soft whisper. "Nobody ever comes out." "Out of where?" said Charlie. "And nobody ever goes in." "In where?" cried Charlie. "Wonka's factory, of course." "Grandpa, what do you mean?" "I mean workers, Charlie, workers. All factories," said Grandpa Joe, "have workers streaming in and out of the gates in the morning and the evening, except Wonka's. Have you ever seen a single person go in the place or come out?" Little Charlie looked slowly around at the four old faces, one after the other, and they all looked back at him. They were friendly, smiling faces, but they were also quite serious. There is no sign of joking or pulling leg on any of them. "Well, have you?" asked Grandpa Joe. I really don't know, Grandpa," Charlie stammered. Whenever I walk past the factory, the gates seem to be closed." "Exactly," said Grandpa Joe. "But there must be people working." "Not people, Charlie. Not ordinary people, anyway." "Then who?" cried Charlie. That it, you see, that's another of Mr. Wonka's cleverness. Charlie, dear," Mrs. Bucket called out from where she was standing at the door, "it's time for bed. That's enough for tonight." "No, Mother, I must hear. Tomorrow, darling." "That's right, Grandpa Joe. We'll tell the rest of it tomorrow evening."
Hi, I'm Tammy Brown from room 120, and I'll be reading chapter 4 today from our Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Chapter 4 is titled The Secret Workers. The next evening, Grandpa Joe went on with his story. "You see, Charlie," he said, "not so very long ago, there used to be thousands of people working in Mr. Willy Wonka's factory. Then one day, all of a sudden, Mr. Wonka had to ask every single one of them to leave, to go home, never to come back again." "But why?" asked Charlie. "Because of spies." "Spies?" "Yes, all the other chocolate makers, you see, had begun to grow jealous of the wonderful candies that Mr. Wonka was making, and they started sending in spies to steal his secret recipes. The spies took jobs in the Wonka factory, pretending that they were ordinary workers, and while they were there, each of them found out exactly how a certain special thing was made. And did they go back to their own factories and tell? Asked Charlie. They must have, answered Grandpa Joe. Because soon after that, Fickelgruber's factory started making an ice cream that would never melt, even in the hottest sun. Then Mr. Prodno's factory came out with a chewing gum that never lost its flavor, however much you chewed it. And then Mr. Slugworth's factory began making candy balloons that you could blow up to huge sizes before you popped them with a pin and gobbled them up. And so on, and so on, and so on. And Mr. Willy Wonka tore his beard and shouted, "This is terrible! I shall be ruined! There are spies everywhere! I shall have to close the factory." "But he didn't do that," Charlie said. "Oh yes, he did. He told all the workers that he was sorry, but they would have to go home. Then he shut the main gates and fastened them with a chain, and suddenly Wonka's giant chocolate factory became silent and deserted. The chimney stopped smoking, the machine stopped whirring, and from then on, not a single chocolate or candy was made. Not a soul went in or out, and even Mr. Willy Wonka himself disappeared completely. Months and months went by," Grandpa Joe went on, "but still the factory remained closed, and everybody said, 'Poor Mr. Wonka. He was so nice, and he made such marvelous things, but he's finished now. It's all over.' Then something astonishing happened. One day, early in the morning, thin columns of white smoke were seen to be coming out of the tops of the tall chimneys of the factory. People in town stopped and stared. 'What's going on?' they cried. 'Someone's lit the furnaces. Mr. Wonka must be opening again.' They ran to the gates, expecting to see them wide open and Mr. Wonka standing there to welcome his workers back. But no, the great iron gates were still locked and chained as securely as ever, and Mr. Wonka was nowhere to be seen. 'But the factory is working,' the people shouted. 'Listen, you can hear the machines. They're all whirring again, and you can smell the smell of melting chocolate in the air.' Grandpa Joe leaned forward and laid a long, bony finger on Charlie's knee, and he said softly, 'But most mysterious of all, Charlie, were the shadows in the windows outside the factory. The people standing on the street outside could see small dark shadows moving about behind the frosted glass windows.' 'Shadows of whom?' said Charlie quickly. That's exactly what everyone else wanted to know. 'The place is full of workers,' the people shouted, 'but nobody's gone in. The gates are locked. It's crazy. Nobody ever comes out either.' But there was no question at all, said Grandpa Joe, that the factory was running, and it's gone on running ever since for these last 10 years. What's more, the chocolates and candies it's been turning out have become more fantastic and delicious all the time. And of course now, when Mr. Wonka invents something new and some new and wonderful candy, neither Mr. Fickelgruber, nor Mr. Prodnose, nor Mr. Slugworth, nor anybody else is able to copy it. No spies can go into the factory to find out how it is made." "But Grandpa, who?" cried Charlie. "Who is Mr. Wonka using to do all that work in the factory?" "Nobody knows, Charlie." "That's absurd. Hasn't someone asked Mr. Wonka?" "Nobody sees him anymore. He never comes out. The only things that come out of that place are chocolates and candies. And they come out through a special trap door in the wall, all packed and addressed, and they are picked up every day by post office trucks." "But Grandpa, what sort of people are they that work in there?" "Oh, my dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, "that is one of the great mysteries of the chocolate-making world. We know only one thing about them. They're very small. The faint shadows that sometimes appear behind the windows, especially late at night when the lights are on, are those of tiny people no taller than my knee." "There aren't any such people," Charlie said. Just then, Mr. Bucket, Charlie's father, came into the room. He was home from the toothpaste factory, and he was waving an evening newspaper rather excitedly. "Have you heard the news?" he cried. He held up the paper so they could see the huge headline. The headline said, "Wonka Factory to be opened at last to lucky few."